Give us some time. I'll wait a couple of minutes to give the opportunity to other people to join. So we will start in 2-3 minutes. Thank you very much for joining this second in the row, but first on dedicated revision on of GeoDCAT-AP specification. As you can see, here is the agenda of today's webinar. Next slide. You are familiarized with our practicalities. We will kindly ask you to mute yourselves. Please share with us any thoughts in the chat or raise your hand when you would like to speak, and we will kindly ask for your permission of recording the section. If anybody objects to this, please be kind to write in the chat. Next slide, please. So you may, since we have people from coming from different communities, the INSPIRE community, allow me to present in a short what SEMIC does. A SEMIC community, semantic interoperability community that was initiated in 2010, has as a mission to promote semantic interoperability among member states. How does this? By offering specifications, meaning data models which has such as core vocabularies, DCAT-AP and CPSV-AP that are regularly maintained, as is the case of the current webinar. It conducts pilots in order to boost and initiate different solutions in collaboration with the public administration in order to enhance interoperability, maturity, and also to spread the outcome to the rest of the public administration, and also provides a knowledge hub where you can find training materials, guidelines, the different events that are taking place in order to foster semantic interoperability. Next slide, please. So, what actually SEMIC focus on creating semantic specification by paying special attention to other synergies, such as those that are such as the high-value data set and the data spaces, and how the specifications, semi-specification, are shaped and extended under this context. It provides a focus on the catalog of services, provides specification on how to model a catalog of services. It also includes base registries. It also supports in the interoperability policy implementation by the focus on the legal and the synergy between legal and semantic aspect of interoperability, and launches some pilots to bridge to meet the world of AI and interoperability. Next slide, please. As we said, the focus on the specification, we differentiate SEMIC specification into two parts, the different categories: core vocabularies, which are more abstract data semantic models that try to provide a standardized approach for providing key concepts that can be easy, such as location, business, organization, which can be easily extendable and become more restrictive through the different application profiles, where application profiles extend the core vocabularies with mandatory constraints, relations, and properties. Next slide, please. Here you can see on the top of the different core vocabularies that SEMIC offers, on the bottom the different application profiles. So from here I pass the floor to my colleague Jakub in order to go one slide up, please. Here we're focusing on the objective on the DCAT-AP. What is the DCAT-AP? DCAT-AP is a data specific semantic model in order to help the discoverability, the findability of the different data set. It supports the Open Data Directive and in order to identify data set. It is an extension of W3C DCAT in the sense that it expresses constraints and usage nodes. It adds additional properties and it has a number of range of applicability in open data portals such as the one of the publication office, in base registries, in data spaces with a different variation, as well as in machine learning with the ML DCAT-AP. We will have a forthcoming webinar on this. Next slide, please. So I would like to stress the fact that this webinar is a joint effort with 3DGs. First of all, the Joint Research Center and the DG in Varroan, which are more focused on the INSPIRE Directive, as well as SEMIC community, which belongs to Digit DG. So I pass the floor now to my colleague Jacob to continue with the presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Today is the first working group webinar, so we'll have a set of issues that we'll go through and also vote on the proposed resolutions. But before we do that, let me remind you of the context of GeoDCAT-AP and the ecosystem in which GeoDCAT-AP actually is placed. The inputs for GeoDCAT-AP nowadays are the W3C DCAT, the World Wide Web Consortium specification for data catalogs, its application profile for Europe, DCAT-AP, and its annex DCAT-AP for high-value datasets. That's from the web data catalogs side. And from the geospatial side, it's the ISO standards and their INSPIRE extension in Europe. Last time we also mentioned that there is a recent activity by the OGC that they will create a Europe independent application profile of DCAT called GeoDCAT, and GeoDCAT-AP still aims to be compliant with GeoDCAT as well. Last time we also stressed that there is the high-value datasets reporting upcoming, and that GeoDCAT-AP together with DCAT-AP HVD is a perfect opportunity to ease the reporting burden on the member states and to increase the findability of geospatial datasets in generic open data portals. So we aim at GeoDCAT-AP at being interoperable in terms of DCAT, DCAT-AP, DCAT-AP HVD, and facilitate the HVD reporting through DCAT-AP HVD and facilitate increased findability of geospatial datasets through GeoDCAT-AP. Now, as to the revision plan, we already had our introductory webinar last month in February, and today we have our first working group webinar, and we also have a second webinar planned for April and a third one for May, where the exact date has not been specified yet. Today, we'll focus on datasets, distributions, their relationships, alignment with DCAT-AP 3, and alignment with the SEMIC style guide, and a couple of additional issues. Then the second webinar will be focused more on geospatial issues that we have identified, both issues regarding GeoDCAT-AP itself, and also issues coming from the generic DCAT-AP, where some clarification of geo aspects is requested from the geospatial community. And the topic for the third webinar, so far we have the topic of the supporting tools planned, but probably there will be more themes from or arising from the work on GeoDCAT-AP as it will progress throughout the coming months. Last time in the introductory webinar, we held a poll on awareness and usage of GeoDCAT-AP supporting tools in the community. And the results basically were that regarding the XSLT transformation, transforming the INSPIRE metadata represented in XML to an RDF-based GeoDCAT-AP representation, most of the participants have at least heard of the tool, or they are actually actively using it or definitely planning on using it. This is not the case for the rest of the tools, such as an API or a web-based browser of CSW endpoints, and the tools Minting Your Rise for spatial resolutions and specific geometries. There, most of the community was not familiar with the tools. Now, the revision of GeoDCAT-AP is mostly done in the GeoDCAT-AP GitHub repository, where we have a set of issues that we have identified or the community has identified, and we will deal with them as we progress with the revision. There are currently 51 open issues, so as you can see, that's quite a lot. And this also means that there will not be space to discuss all of them in the webinars that we have planned. Therefore, there are two major types of issues in that repository. One type of issue will have just the webinar and the date of the webinar as a label. And those issues are those that we plan to go through in more detail with slides and possible voting directly during the webinar. We'll see a couple of examples of those in a minute. But then there will be minor issues that are primarily to be discussed directly in GitHub and voted on using the feature of GitHub where you can give thumbs up or down. Of course, if you give a thumbs down, then we expect also to receive a feedback, a textual feedback, what exactly is your opinion on such issues. And those minor issues will be listed in the webinar slides, but they will not be discussed during the webinars. There will be always a clear resolution proposed in that issue, and based on the voting and the discussion in that issue, we'll aim to have that issue resolved before the indicated webinar in the label. Of course, in case that there will be a complex discussion in one of those minor issues, that issue will be escalated to a major issue, and that will be discussed further in the webinar if that will be the case. Now, we are at the point where we can start discussing specific issues. And the first group of issues that we have prepared for today has to do with datasets, distributions, and their relationships. Already in the introductory webinar, we have identified an issue to be dealt with, and that is the incorporation of DCAT dataset series into GeoDCAT-AP, where it can represent a geospatial series that is often used in the INSPIRE metadata. Here we ask the community to provide evidence of usage of dataset series. We have received some feedback, so thank you for providing it. Based on that feedback, we identified that we should clarify the expectations and the notion of a dataset series, how it is viewed in INSPIRE world and in the DCAT and DCAT-AP world. So in DCAT and DCAT-AP, a dataset series is defined as a collection of datasets that are published separately, but share some characteristics that group them. And in DCAT-AP, the expectation is that there are datasets that belong to a dataset series. The dataset series here is used as a grouping element for those individual datasets. And those datasets then have distributions which provide access to the actual data contained in the datasets and therefore in the dataset series. In INSPIRE, spatial dataset series means a collection of spatial datasets sharing the same product specification. There is no notion of or no requirement that the datasets of the series need to be also published separately. And we have identified that sometimes, indeed, there are dataset series that are not linked to any particular datasets, which is kind of a difference from the DCAT-AP world. In INSPIRE, the fact whether a metadata record is a dataset or a series is indicated by the scope code, whether it is a series or a dataset. And then there can be the usage of the parent identifier, which kind of corresponds to what in DCAT-AP we have as DCAT in series relation of a dataset to a dataset series. But there is no, as far as we know, no formal requirement that what is tagged as a series indeed has datasets linking to that series using parent identifiers. So based on these facts, the mapping from INSPIRE metadata to DCAT-AP will use the scope code to differentiate between a dataset and a dataset series. But still, we wanted to take this opportunity to ask the community whether indeed this is the only thing to be considered, or whether actually there are some other ways of connecting datasets to dataset series in the INSPIRE metadata. So if you have a note on that, please raise your hand or put it in the chat. If there are no hands risen at the moment, please, if you have any comment on this, see the corresponding GitHub issue and place a comment there. Otherwise, we'll proceed with the direction that I just presented.
Yeah, I think that let's continue. If not, I don't see any hands raised yet. So this is clear. So if anyone has comments, as Jacob said, go to GitHub, or maybe at the end we have some time to rediscuss this, to give feedback.
Okay, so the next issue is about a data service language tag that is used in GeoDCAT-AP already, but the current wording of the usage note says this property refers to a language supported by the data service. Now, the data service is the entire class or the instance of that class. And from this wording, it is unclear to what exactly the language attribute refers to. There was a similar discussion in DCAT-AP regarding the data service format. And here, the consensus was that a data service format refers to the structure that can be returned by querying the endpoint URL, which is not necessarily the same as the format of a file-based distribution of a data set. And now we are wondering this data service language. There is also a tag dataset language. So when the data itself is in English or French or German, that would be the dataset language tag. And we are wondering what is the actual meaning of the data service language. Whether, for instance, it is the language of the parameters of the service and the data structures, so XML tags, CSV column headers, and JSON key names returned by that service, or whether maybe it is something else. So the proposition here is to change the wording of the usage note from referring to the entire instance of the class to the language of the structure that can be returned by querying the endpoint URL, which would be consistent with how the discussion was held with data service format in DCAT-AP 3. But if there are any other suggestions, now would be the time to voice them. So if you agree with the proposition, please give us a +1 in the chat. I see a hand raised first. So please, Benoit.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Benoit. I work for Brussels region, and we have been concerned by language problems for years. We have been wondering what is the language of a data set in INSPIRE meaning for years, because in my opinion, the data structure should be machine readable, so it should be available in a structured way that does not change in function of the languages. But we say that a data set is, I guess it's quite the same for a service. We say that a data set is available in French or Dutch or in English if we have specifications, so technical specification or stuff like that available in these languages. So the data set does not change. Is the same. It's always the same in French or in Dutch. That does not change, but we do maintain a technical specification that defines everything in French, and we have the same in Dutch. And from time to time, we have it in English too. So this is the way we understand that attribute.
Okay, so just to clarify, you're saying that the XML tags are all in one language.
Yeah,
the data itself, the values are also in one language, but what you indicate in dataset language refers to the documentation of the data.
It should be understood. The dataset should be understood by a Dutch speaker or a French speaker people, and so it's how we understand that attribute.
So for a data service, this would for you again point to the language.
I would do it like that, because otherwise, if you have a French or Dutch structure, you almost have two different distribution or two data sets. From me, it's not the same files anymore. It's two things different. So
yeah, the case could be here that since it is a data service, it may have a parameter that allows you to say in which language you would wish to access it, maybe through HTTP content negotiation or a parameter. So we are wondering whether that is what how it is used, maybe. So that is not the case in your with you.
Are there any other opinions? I don't see any further hands raised, no comments in the chat.
Okay, so in that case, could we get please in the chat +1s if you agree with this proposition, or -1s if you don't?
Yeah. I see the voting is coming in. If you have no clear opinion and you really are doubting, then a 0 is acceptable, just to ensure that we know what is the community about. It means that 0s, we will take it more to the positive side. Means that you still, if it is the majority is positive, then we still continue with this proposal. But
okay, so I see lots of 0s and some +1s.
Yeah. So I propose that we continue with this proposal as with it, and that if you encounter situations or unclarity about it, then you note it in the GitHub issue.
Okay, so thanks for the voting. And let's move on to another issue. This one is actually quite similar to the previous one. And this one refers to character encoding as a property of a catalog record or a property of a distribution, because there the usage note currently says for catalog record that this property should be used to specify the character encoding of the catalog record. So again, the instance of the entire class. And the same goes for distribution. This property should be used to specify the character encoding of the distribution. And from this wording, it is again unclear what it actually refers to. So the actual meaning for a catalog record is probably the textual metadata properties used on the data set, which is linked to the catalog record using both primary topic. And the actual meaning for distribution is the textual content of the downloadable file linked using the DCAT download URL or findable using DCAT access URL, or in the output of the data service linked using DCAT access service. So that is what the character encoding rather refers to. So our proposition here is to change the wording of the usage note to reflect this. So a character encoding used in the textual metadata describing titles, descriptions, etc. of the cataloged resource, and a character encoding used in the downloadable file or output of the data service represented by the distribution. So again, if we could, we have a hand raised, so please.
Yeah, Jesper Zetitz here from the State Chancellery of Schleswig-Holstein, Germany. I wonder, do we really need the different encodings for the catalog resource? Because in my opinion, this is an RDF resource and we don't have this, or it's already handled the problem of encoding of RDF descriptions. So do we really need this for the catalog? Sure, for the distribution, that's for sure that we need it there. But do we really need it for the RDF representation of a catalog record?
Okay, this is a valid note. Thanks. It is the fact that in RDF we always have the UTF-8 encoding of textual elements. The problem is that this is not the case with the INSPIRE metadata, where XML is used, and then the metadata records indeed can be encoded differently. And one of the objectives of GeoDCAT-AP is also to not lose any information. So if we had the case where we primarily have GeoDCAT-AP representation in RDF, and we would have to create a INSPIRE compatible XML representation, then maybe the indication of the character encoding could come in handy, because we would know how to encode the metadata. But I agree that in RDF, this is not strictly necessary. Matthias.
I agree with the previous speaker. This should not be expressed at all. If you have a character encoding problem, you need to convert it when you are transferring it into RDF. And also note that you are transferring things into RDF, not XML, that is compatible with RDF somehow. This will just cause confusion. And that's one of the issues with the XSLT transforms, that you are basically doing a very simple transferal into RDF, which are these kind of problems would appear.
Okay, and how do you handle, I think it was you who mentioned that you are also doing the opposite transformation. There you always use UTF-8.
Yes, of course, following the way you express things in RDF. So you parse things from XML into whatever language you're using, if it's JavaScript or Java, which handles the character encoding, and then you need to serialize this in RDF. You're relying on the RDF library to serialize this in proper UTF-8. And you should never, in principle, my opinion is that you should never try to have these kind of properties that tells you how other properties, other triples in the same, on the catalog record or something. And the same goes for expressing that the language of a set of triples shouldn't be specified on that level. It should always be in the language tag on each triple.
Okay, thanks. So in that case, I propose to split the voting on this one into two. So let's start with the change for the distribution. So all in favor of changing the wording for the distribution, +1s and -1s or 0s, please? Okay, so I think we can see a majority of +1s, so we'll change the wording for the distribution. And now for the catalog record character encoding, there we have a counter proposal to actually drop this one from GeoDCAT-AP altogether. So all in favor of dropping this from GeoDCAT-AP. Could we get +1s, -1s, or 0s? Okay, so I saw some +1s and some 0s, which seems to go in the direction of actually dropping character encoding for catalog records from GeoDCAT-AP, as GeoDCAT-AP is an RDF-based specification, and therefore the encoding there is fixed. So,
which we will add that to the usage note. I think we should add this in a usage note somewhere, just to clarify in the mapping.
okay, so thank you. Let's continue. The next group of issues. The next group of issues is regarding the alignment with the CEMIC style guide. We have already announced these issues.
Sorry, Jacob, there is a comment from Benoit in the chat.
Okay.
It's okay, I just dropped it, but it doesn't need a response, an answer for now. It just for the next time.
All right, thank you.
It's a command for the organization.
Okay, so yes, let's discuss that if we have time, or we'll come back to you on that. Thank you. So this group of issues is regarding the style guide and the alignment of GeoDCAT-AP with the CEMIC style guide, where a repeating problem is that generic properties in GeoDCAT-AP are currently being used in specific contexts with a specific code list or a specific meaning in GeoDCAT-AP, and this for one, is not in line with guidelines on property reuse coming from the CEMIC style guide, but this approach may create problems in a cross-profile environment where we would have data described using more profiles than just GeoDCAT-AP. To be specific, in this issue, we can see that in GeoDCAT-AP, there is a service category tied to a classification of spatial data services code list, a service type with its code list, and a resource type with its code list. And all these properties map to the generic property DCT type from Dublin Core. Each one is tied to a different code list, which makes it a bit hard to validate, and it may cause issues when other profiles used in the data have a conflicting requirement on the generic property DCT type, which the more the property is generic, the more likely it is to happen in a cross-profile environment. So our suggestion here is, or the proposition is, to introduce sub-properties of DCT type for each of the specific code list and attach the specific usage nodes to those sub-properties along with the proper ranges, which makes this, validable better, and it removes the issues in a cross-profile environment. So if there are any comments, please raise your hand. Okay, I can see that we are already voting. So if there are no comments, please vote on this, whether +1 or.
Matthias, you raised your hand.
I would just like to propose that maybe this is something to raise in the style guide discussion, whether this is a limitation that we always need to introduce some properties for these kind of situations. What is very common is that you have someone that wants to make an adaptation and they're looking for properties to reuse, and it's hard to find, and then you use something generic like a DCT type or conforms to or something else. And in that case, you do not always want to introduce new properties. And there are other ways of restriction, saying using patterns on the URIs and stuff like that. So I just would like to, I agree with the situation today, we have to vote on it, but I would like to upvote this discussion to the style guide.
I think it's good that I understand the concern. In this case, what we realize as well is that the properties have unique definitions. We hope that they have the intent is to have them as a unique definition and reusable assets as well, to aim for that. The alternative, and this is the challenge, of course, in the constraints that you put upon it, like this 0 to 1, if you see on the right-hand side, these are very restrictive things, and we have to be very careful then in the generic reuse of the properties. Not only the code list, but as well the constraints and the expectation of the usage in the cross-border, cross-profile usage. And this is unfortunate, of a challenging part. But I agree, Matthias, let's see what better guidelines we can, or more precise guidelines we can make to make these decisions even more informed across each other.
Would it be possible to postpone this question until we have discussed it a bit further?
The question is, let's say, you could ask here a different question now for these ones. Is this the outcome of a mapping? And the objective is to map codes that exist in INSPIRE metadata to the DCAT level, then I think we can have DCT type, but then have many values, the outcome of the mapping with no constraints. If you are going to reuse your property in the same, as a unique thing, and you want to use it, then it becomes hard. In the same case, in this case here, it is in the same class. How do you going to distinguish between a service category and the resource type in the RDF versus the profile that you want to show on the screen? That's very hard.
There are mechanisms shackled to doing this, so I think it's a bigger question on whether it is a good idea. What is the benefit and yeah, of introducing new properties, and what is the negative aspects of this?
Yeah. So what would be the effect of postponement on this? Do you think? What would be the alternative solutions that you see? Yeah.
I think we have the exact same problem with the DCT subject and DCAT theme, overlying them and overriding. We will end up with a lot of new properties, especially when we have a lot of different aspects of INSPIRE that is possible, and it becomes further and further goes away from the vanilla DCAT, and it will be harder to understand. But postponing it, because I would like to see discussion in style guide regarding this.
Okay, good. But the thing is, we would like to land with GeoDCAT-AP before summer, so we have to make a decision before that.
Well, if it's only me, I think Matthias Grönewald as well agreed. So maybe some other voice on this.
Matthias, I give if you first.
Thank you. If I may comment, I would absolutely agree with what Matthias said. The three mentioned, like the DCAT team and the other subject, those will be an issue, but if we build sub-properties, we run into basically ontology building. We are extending a property with properties, and the list is open. For GeoDCAT or for the INSPIRE community, we might be in the lucky position that it's a relatively constrained space, so that we can kind of limit it to a certain amount of properties. But if you look into other DCAT profiles, we mentioned ML and others, this is a really open list, and basically this is ontology building. I really disagree. This is a good way to go. This is a open question how to best resolve this, and I agree this should be discussed in the style guide, because one solution could be sub-profiling. So basically Shackle offers a solution to provide a list of constraints, for example, the existence of 3 DCT type with certain values that come from a certain controlled list or something, or what Matthias mentioned, like validating actual patterns. This is, I feel, a much better option, and to then find a mechanism in the style guide how to import profiles into each other and connect those in a correct fashion, so that people that need to create these very unique or very specific validations can build their own sub-profile, publish it, and refer to it, and can import it into each other. So this is the only way you can really dig into, in my opinion, this is the only way to really dig into these very highly specific properties without having the challenge of mapping out the world, which is practically impossible. So I would also be in favor of postponing this decision till the style guide finds a solution on this.
Yeah, I have a question to you, Matthias. Good well. And these properties that you see here on the screen, are they for you constraints on DCT type, or are they properties where you want to have a unique management, have a unique definition, with the unique evolution into it, reusable assets? This is the question I want to raise. Not look beyond that they're mapped on the same URI, but the question, I would just take the opportunity for the discussion, because it will be for the next topics will be similar. Is this a unique property that you would say, I want to use it in a unique context somewhere else?
I see what you're aiming at. I'd say we're here, like I said, in the lucky position that I would not say, I don't personally see a real reuse outside the scope of GeoDCAT for those specific properties, but the process itself opens a door. So if we do sub-properties for these very defined properties, then we should do them for every others. And this is not viable. So I feel we should find a more generic solution with this example. So, and also I am not from the geo community, so I cannot really judge if those properties are heavily reused in related contexts. I could imagine in the data spaces of mobility or in the data spaces of Earth observation, there will be a reuse outside of INSPIRE. So, but I'm not an expert on this field of research.
Okay, so I think that it is clear.
Thanks for the feedback.
Yep.
Benoit?
Thank you very much, but it's more or less the same thing as
Benoit, you're very faint, so I don't think everyone can hear you.
Excuse me?
I think we can hear
We can hear him.
Can you hear me or not? I didn't understand.
No, go ahead, please.
Okay. But I said it's the same as it has been said before. I think we should use a generic approach because I think it's not a good idea to create new properties. I think it's better to specify specify the context with a concept scheme, specific concept scheme. In INSPIRE, there are many specific keywords for the dataset, but for the services, and every couple of years there is a new keywords for dataset, and I think that these datasets are to be understood beyond the INSPIRE world. There are many interesting keywords that are used beyond the strict INSPIRE community. So I think it's a better idea to use a general approach. Otherwise, these rich, semantically rich elements will be lost for the non-INSPIRE consumers. So for the it's a general position. I don't think it's a good idea to create sub-properties, and I think it's better to use other ways to specify the context of your keywords.
Okay, so thanks for the note. It's clear that this issue needs to be discussed further. So no decision to be taken on this issue at the moment. And we'll continue the discussion on GitHub. Geraldine, please.
Yes, hello. I think for everything, not only for this one, it's all about doing it only once. That's the basics. We are doing GeoDCAT to have the niche that is ISO out there in the DCAT world. And so if we have to provide for INSPIRE and later on it's Green Deal and whatever, conform that specification, and we have to do that kind of categories, types. Also the teams are in that same sector. We have different ontologies, different thesaurus. If we have to do it conform DCAT, we have other ones. And so it's really looking at how should it be done. And I think the Matthiases have more knowledge about how it's done in the DCAT world. But then it's at the different niches to say, okay, we really need this and that, conform the regulations over there. And then otherwise we solve the regulations and go to one ontology or one thesaurus and having it used in both worlds then, the generic open data world and the geo data world, for example. Or we have some solutions otherwise, but then it has to be always the same kind. Now we are doing this at sub-property of the DCT type. Another one is doing it conform the concept scheme, etc. And it's one chaos. So we have to come to an agreed proposal then. But it should be working for the whole, and not only at the one view, but we have to solve it at the best way to align really and to bridge really the different standards. So it's moving very fast, and we always are a step behind after the DCAT world, I think, and it's too fast to really say this is our approach for anyone to move at the GitHub all the topics. It goes too fast for a lot of us. So we are missing the boat then in all the discussions, and it will be chosen in one way and not maybe the way it could be if we have a greater look with more people. So that are all the remarks I wanted to share.
Okay, so thanks for that point of view. And we announced the timeline actually in the introductory webinar already. And as Bert mentioned, we try to have the GeoDCAT-AP 3 revision before summer. That's why we ask for the discussions to happen mainly in GitHub, because the timing is a bit restricted. That I agree.
Jody has his hand raised. Jakub?
Yeah, Jody.
Thank you. So I was willing to propose, since I see that many people in the chat is asking for more time to revise the proposals. Maybe it could be an option to rediscuss some of the issues where we cannot achieve a consensus during the meeting, because it's a rather technical matter, and it's also difficult to really raise a position on them for the community. So for those where we cannot reach a consensus, try to promote discussion now in the webinar, also in GitHub repository, and maybe vote them in the next webinar. So this could be a possible way of doing. I don't know if Pavlina wanted to
No, I would
react
like
on that.
to welcome this proposal. I think that some issues that, as we are discussing right now, are very important. And since we have a lot of people attending, I will highly appreciate for your feedback, because it's something that it's not something that we want to take a decision rapidly, and this decision may not be applicable in the future. We would like to hear all of your voices to see from an implementation point of view, and from a convergence between GeoDCAT and DCAT, what will be the optimal and practical solution. So yes, feel free. We don't push anything, but we will happy if you could contribute to GitHub and raise your voice there, so that we will take under consideration and reconsider the important issues into a forthcoming webinar. Please, yes.
Okay, so let's continue. The same case will be for this other issue, where we have basically the same situation with DCT subject and the topic categories. So the outcome of the previous issue will be probably the same for this issue as well. And there is one a similar topic, but not quite the same. And that is the case for the reference system, where the generic property DCT conforms to is used in a specific context of a reference system. So now we have a catalog that has a set of standards that it conforms to with conforms to, and then a separate subset of those standards referring to reference systems. And this subset is, however, still mapped to DCT conforms to. However, it is a separate usage node. And here we have here we have basically a proposition or two propositions, two variants. Either we could just drop the specific usage node for reference system, and all the reference system standards will be mentioned in the generic conforms to, among other standards. Or if the reference system standards are to be treated specifically, then we would be in the same situation as the two issues before. So we would introduce a subproperty, for instance, GeoDCAT-AP reference system, a subproperty of DCT conforms to, and treat it separately from the rest of the standards. So here I would actually want to have either a comment. So if you want to voice a comment, please raise your hand again. Otherwise, I would here vote for 1 or 2. So 1 would be merge the usage into conforms to, into the generic one, because reference systems are not that specific, so they can be mixed with the other standards, or two, but here we actually are in the situation that we skipped the last two issues. So maybe if I can change this, plus ones here would mean merge the usage nodes to conforms to, and minus one would be do not do that now, and leave this open to be considered also with the previous issues.
May I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Does merging mean the usage node from the reference system will be added to conforms to?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
A comment here. Even if we decide to overuse the same property for multiple purposes, which we just discussed, it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to merge all usage nodes. I don't see that follows. You could still have a separate section and have it's the same property, maybe the same range, different usage node on the restriction that we are using a different concept scheme or for a different purpose.
But here, Matthias, it's in the same class. It has different labels. So now you have to say, what are you talking about? So then you're talking about a usage node in a particular scoped context. And then I would merge it. It's about the same property. Yeah?
I get your point, but you could argue the same with the concept scheme, that is the same class. It's concept. It's though that you have a concept scheme that differentiate, but that's one step away. So
we don't have this here. There's no something as it goes.
Another option would be to say that this is the reference system needs to be always derived from the URL scheme from EPSG. I don't remember the pattern.
Yeah. It's about the thing is that you see here that there's a label change, the same URI is being used, it's the same range, and we have different usage. And so now, what is the rule that we have to implement on DCT conforms to?
Yes, so it may be actually that in just this case, it is necessary to introduce a reference system property for reason X and Y. Could be that this is something that is not just informative, but something that you need to automatically act on from a software perspective, and there it makes it more sense to have it so super clear that there is no risk of misunderstanding. So that may be one reason for saying that in certain cases we need to have separate property, just to be super clear.
Yeah, indeed.
This is a bigger discussion, but
but that's the question is here from the community side on, do you feel that this is just background information you provide, then you merge it? In that sense, it's just background information, some information about the catalog, about the data sets, because this actually applies to other classes as well. Or is this important that you would like to have some processing uniquely upon it?
If you want to have my just gut feeling, I remember implementing this, and this was one of the ones that made me most uncomfortable with using conforms to directly, the overlaying of properties. Okay. The other felt more okay. This was the one that from my perspective, then I can't explain it exactly, but I understand your concern here.
Okay. Good. I see.
Yeah, I don't see a clear outcome here. Yeah. So that would mean to postpone this as well, and resolve this according to the discussion to be had
Yeah, okay. So in addition to the comment that Matthias now made, I think it is good that from our side that we clearly list beyond the CEMEX style guide the reasons why here this choice or that choice would be made from a business or from a profile perspective. And that's what Matthias is asking to add additionally.
Okay, so then there is one last issue from the same, let's say, category, but still it seems a bit more specific. So I would still go through it. And that's the usage of RDFS comment, a very, very generic property for representation of spatial resolution as a text. So here, the situation is even more confusing since RDFS comment as spatial resolution is also listed as one of the deprecated properties, for instance, for data service, as you can see in the slide. That's because the spatial resolution was split into multiple ways of representation, and some were mapped to DCAT spatial resolution in meters. Others are covered by the data quality vocabulary. And then for the rest, and for the two cases, RDFS comment was deprecated. That's why it is listed as a deprecated property. But then there is a note saying that RDFS comment may still be used for spatial resolution that is specified as a text. And now RDFS comment is a very generic property. So an RDFS comment on a data service can be used, especially in a cross-profile environment, for many different reasons. And this spatial resolution as text basically will get lost. So it seems that it won't be really possible to process it as such. So here, the proposition is, again, introduce a special property for spatial resolution as text and consequently deprecate the usage of the generic RDFS comment altogether. So to the feedback, again, please vote +1 if you agree, or a -1 if you don't. Okay, so far the situation with RDFS comment seems more clear. I can see lots of +1s and no other type of feedback. Okay, so thank you. This proposition will be accepted. Now, the next thing before we actually take a short break is a poll on the intended GeoDCAT-AP usage. And here we'll have two questions. The feedback will be collected via Slido, so please scan the QR code and go to Slido. And the questions are, the first one is, how do you use GeoDCAT-AP? And the options are, we as a member state implement GeoDCAT-AP ourselves, which means, for instance, that in your member state you have a geoportal using INSPIRE metadata, and you use GeoDCAT-AP as a transformation of that to your member state open data portal, and in doing the mapping you use GeoDCAT-AP. So that's option number one. Option number two is we do not do that, but we definitely are going to implement GeoDCAT-AP on the member state level in a similar way that I described for option number one. And option number 3 is we are not going to implement GeoDCAT-AP for on the member state level. And here we rely on the Commission, for instance, to create a GeoDCAT-AP based transformation from the European INSPIRE GeoPortal to dataeuropa.eu or use GeoDCAT-AP on that level. And we do not plan on using implementing GeoDCAT-AP on the member state level at all. So please vote on or give us your feedback on question number 1. In the meantime, I will explain question number 2, to which we will switch in a little bit. So question number 2 is mainly for those who already implement or plan on implementing GeoDCAT-AP on the member state level. And if you are implementing or planning on implementing GeoDCAT-AP on the state member state level, then we would be interested in knowing how exactly are you doing that. So do you use the provided XSLT transformation that is part of the supporting tools of GeoDCAT-AP to transform metadata from a CSW service to a GeoDCAT-AP compliant representation? Or do you adjust that XSLT transformation but still use it? Or maybe do you use GeoDCAT-AP natively as RDF? You may have a triple store where you store GeoDCAT-AP metadata and use that as the primary representation. Or for those who do not use any of that approaches, you do some other transformation yourself. So those are the options for those who implement or plan on implementing GeoDCAT-AP themselves. And I think we can switch to question now. Yeah, question 2 now. Okay, and as promised, please keep voting, and we will take a short break. So see you back here at 11:15. And actually, I'll keep the QR code displayed. Hello, welcome back from the break. Before we get to the next round of issues, let's have a look at the results of the poll. So regarding question 1, how do you use GeoDCAT-AP? The majority will definitely implement GeoDCAT-AP ourselves or are already implementing GeoDCAT-AP. That's 79%. And also almost half of the respondents rely or expect the Commission to implement also a GeoDCAT-AP, for example, for harvesting of the INSPIRE geoportal to data.europa.eu. Regarding question 2, so if you are implementing GeoDCAT-AP, how do you do that? So about 40% of the respondents use either the provided XSLT transformation directly or they adjust it. Majority of those adjust the XSLT transformation. Almost half of the respondents use GeoDCAT-AP natively as RDF. And a majority, 53% of the respondents implement an ad hoc transformation. Okay, so thanks for voting on this. It helps us with understanding how GeoDCAT-AP is actually used by the community. Now, the next set of issues deal with the alignment with DCAT-AP 3. So DCAT-AP 3 is in candidate recommendation stage. And a number of issues resolved in DCAT-AP need to be propagated to GeoDCAT-AP as well as part of the current revision. The first issue from this group I wanted to mention is the removal of inverse properties. This comes actually from the level of DCAT itself, where DCAT has a policy on usage of inverse properties, where the inverse properties, those listed, as inverse properties may be used only in addition to the primary ones. So in profiles of DCAT, such as DCAT-AP, the approach was adopted. And this means that only the primary properties are part of the profile and not the inverses, as to not suggest usage of the inverse properties alone. So this is as compliance with the DCAT-3 policy. Only the primary properties are to be used in profiles of DCAT. In context of GeoDCAT-AP, this concerns mainly two properties. One, in GeoDCAT-AP 2, there was Dublin core is version of. This was to be replaced with DCAT is version of as part of the alignment with DCAT 3 and DCAT-AP 3 as their more specific versioning properties were adopted. But in the light of the inverse properties policy, is version of is to be deprecated because it is the inverse of version, has version property. So that's directly part of the GeoDCAT-AP specification. But there is also a second inverse property used, and that's is primary topic of. This is not directly part of the specification, but it is used in several of the examples included in GeoDCAT-AP. An example of such an example can be seen in the slide, where FOLF is primary topic of is being used, probably for better structuring or readability of the example, but it may be confusing in the light of this inverse properties policy. So the proposition here is to follow the approach and deprecate is version of in the favor of the new DCAT has version, and change the examples to use the primary FOLF primary topic property. So I see already +1s coming in here. So please have your vote. So far, I see only +1s.
And I don't see any hands, so I think this is fine. So
okay, so thank you. We will accept this this proposition. The next issue is regarding the ADMS identifier class. There are currently differences in the usage of ADMS identifier between GeoDCAT-AP and DCAT-AP3. Mainly, it's cost notation in DCAT-AP3 is currently mandatory. In GeoDCAT-AP2, it is optional, which kind of breaks the profiling, because in GeoDCAT-AP you could have an identifier without the notation, which would be not compliant with DCAT-AP3. And the second thing here is that the range of SCOS notation in GeoDCAT-AP is defined as a literal type with a URI of one of the members of the datasite resource identifier scheme, which seems quite specific. And it is unclear why in GeoDCAT-AP there would be this specificity, limiting basically the identifiers only to the members of the datasite resource identifier scheme. Also, this range definition is in conflict with the usage note on the other identifier property, which also has ADMS identifier as a range, because this one allows also other identifier schemes to be used, not just datasite. In addition, datasite does not issue any identifiers on their own. They use DOIs, which are already listed here. So this seems like another inconsistency. So the proposition here is to align with DCAT-AP3, make SCOS notation mandatory, and lift the range restriction on datasite, because it seems a bit restrictive. So please have your say.
yes, Benoit, it is a consequence, indeed, of DCAT-3, DCAT-AP3. I see still positive votes or two neutrals. So if no negative votes, nobody against it, then I think we can continue, Jakob.
Okay, so thanks for the feedback. And another issue that we are facing is actually partly already mentioned today. And the issue is that in DCAT-AP3, with the Dublin Core access rights, there is a EU vocabularies access rights named authority list that must be used with Dublin Core access rights. In GeoDCAT-AP, there is also the INSPIRE limitations on public access vocabulary that can be used with this property. And also, when this code list or vocabulary is not used, then a blank note with a textual content, as can be seen in the slide, is also allowed. And this situation is similar to other cases, such as DCAT theme, as was already mentioned today. So this is more of a call for discussion of this topic, as this pattern is quite common across profiles, and there is a related issue in DCAT-AP itself on the meaning of the must on controlled vocabularies. Whether when we say that a controlled vocabulary must be used with a certain property, whether it means that one of the values of that property must be from that control vocabulary, or whether it means that no other value than once from the vocabulary must be used, which would then prohibit this way of profiling that we have in GeoDCAT-AP. And we would have to either create sub-properties again and move the code list usage to those, or we would have to devise a mapping from from the INSPIRE code list to the EU vocabularies code list, so that we know which values of the INSPIRE limitations on public access correspond to which values of the EU vocabularies access rights null. And in the transformation from INSPIRE to GeoDCAT-AP, this mapping would be used. So actually in GeoDCAT-AP, only the EU null would be used then. Here, I would actually like to ask you for your opinions rather than voting on the specific propositions, because they tie to a broader discussion in the DCAT-AP GitHub. So, do you have any opinions on this?
I see Mantas is providing. Is it possible to validate such cases as being part of a scheme? For example, the requirement could be that the access rights must provide at least one URI from the controlled vocabulary scheme. That this is one of the options of the interpretations of the must, but we have to be ensuring that this is applicable to all meanings of the must in case of controlled vocabulary. You cannot have, I want to raise that point, that you have must in two meanings in the same table. For instance, to give you another example, there's the media type, where we say it must be IANA. That means that you can as well have other code lists available than the IANA ones. So the meaning in the table, I want to ensure that we have the same meaning in the same table for the word must. So I want to raise that awareness in the discussion. So in this case, there are two options. We can be very practical and ensure that there's a one-to-one mapping, and then the problem goes away to a certain extent. But in general, the discussion, and that's where the issue, the meaning of musts on controlled vocabularies is so important. There we would like to have your feedback upon. And yes, we can write more complicated validation rules. So, Matthias, I'll give you the word.
I think it's the same issue again. The property, reuse of the same property, and validating that it's actually for two different purposes. And yes, must be defined in another way if you allow this. So typically it would mean that you're only allowed to have access rights pointing to one of the values of the vocabularies access rights, not two, for instance. That would be the necessary cardinality restriction of one, and there must be at least one. So yeah, it must be exactly one for this pattern. So the option one is, but we have to redefine must. Yes.
Geraldine?
If I understand correct, in the example we are transferring the ISO world to GeoDCAT. We map indeed where it is meant to be as in no limitations, that the access rights are public from the code list of the publications office indeed. And then the real INSPIRE limitations linking, we put it in the DCT rights as statements. And then you have the real license as well in the DCT license. So it's a bit of the combination of the three DCAT attributes that combine everything that you're aligned to all of it, I think. So that could be an option as well, I think.
Yeah, certainly that's another aspect, Geraldine, you raised, is that do we lose information, or do we, this choice of the INSPIRE aspect, the wording as it is being used in INSPIRE, do we will see it back in GeoDCAT-AP or not? And with your additional mappings, you add those information in another place more visible. So this is not losing in that case. And so the INSPIRE statement is still transferred and still present in some way. So that is an additional aspect in this particular case to be considered. If we just do the mapping and we don't put the additional effort as you do, then you lose as well the particular no limitation statement from INSPIRE in GeoDCAT-AP. You don't know it anymore. You know only the EU vocabulary is now public access, for public accessible. So
on the other hand, there is a second remark. There are a lot of values over there, and we only use the public and the not public values because all the others are a bit gray, something in between. And for the services, they have a little other meaning as well. So it's not that clear in how you deal with that code list on data sets and on the services on the data sets. So yeah, it's a bit a gray defined code list, in fact.
Okay, so there's indeed, so there's a work on the mapping. If we go for the mapping, or that's still challenges onto it, indeed. I'll try to pick up other comments. From Agatha, she mentions meaning of monitoring access. That might be the meaning of the property, but that we are not discussing. We're not discussing the meaning of the property, if I'm right.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah, we are discussing the alignment on the challenge of having two code lists for the same property. That's the challenge.
What I just wanted to clarify or just put your eyes on was the situation that if we are discussing the distributed network and the increased level of anonymity and unique sets to be of data to be reused and unique sets of users to request for the data that is publicly accessible, it is kind of confusing when you are regarding Web 3, Web 4, Web 3.0, and so on. So I'm just, I'm not an expert on databases, as I've mentioned several times, but to consider the newly coming distributive networks and the use of society and exceeded level of privacy and anonymity, I think that this particular point can be extremely vital in the future. If you, so I would postpone the discussion for the purpose of trying to consider how it can influence the future structure of a network that is distributed, more or less. Okay.
Yeah, but this here, to give you some context, these code lists are certainly the INSPIRE one are legislative code lists. So there's a code list that is in the legislation that indicates this, the services or the access to the data sets. And that is the one to be used in the context of INSPIRE.
Okay.
And what we have been using in DCAT-AP is another code list, and they are on the same property, having similar purpose, but slightly look to the legislation in a different way. And that's what Geraldine already mentioned, that the mapping between those code lists is not yet one-to-one as in bullet point 3 is mentioned yet.
Well, let me clarify whether we can be on the same page. I'm asking you whether this particular concept is hacker-proof in the context of that future distributed network when you are going to have an anonymous, totally anonymous user that is going to ask for a data that is included within the public database. Would you like to consider pressing the access facility at the top of your security code, or do you think it's irrelevant and I'm just posing a question that is out of the topic?
I think this is a question that is out of this topic for this property.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for your feedback on this. If there are no other voices at the moment, please have a look.
Lena, I don't think it's the top priority to keep the content of the code list. Okay, that's a voice in that area. I would like to hear from that as well, if this is needed or not, for more people from the INSPIRE community to know if this is an objective or not.
And I see a hand raised, Daria.
Yeah.
Yes, hello. I don't have really a question related to the technical implementation, but I have the question related to the content of these different vocabularies, which are related to different reasons for the limitation on public access. So we have specific limitations on public access specified in the INSPIRE Directive, so it is part of the legal text. And maybe in other directives, we will have some other specific limitations. So it's more the question, how do we want to manage all these different limitations that maybe cannot be directly mapped one to another in the future? That's more the question. So now we have, let's say, 2 code lists, or let's say 2 vocabularies, but maybe in the future there will be more. So is there, let's say, a better way, a smarter way? How do you want them to manage all these different vocabularies for the future as well? Or do you want to have a mapping between them and have just one vocabulary that will be used and everything will be mapped to that one? So how do you see this? Is more this type of question, because this might appear in different directives as well, or in other particular use cases now.
It's a good question. Here, I think there are 2 aspects on it. I think at the level of the EU and the Commission, we should be aware that we should reduce this situation as much as possible to first try to do that. But if it occurs that we have support to do good mappings and to map it to each other. And I think the colleagues from the Publications Office are as well into the meeting room in the webinar, that they can confirm that they have the tools available to express the mappings, to keep the mappings maintained machine readable. So this is a good point, but of course, the less mappings we have, the better. The less discussion there is. But yeah, this identification on all levels, I think here. Paulina, I think this is indeed the route forward. Huh? Do you know additional things?
No, I don't, but it is true.
Yeah, okay. So thanks, Daria, for pointing out this again. Okay. Okay, good, clear. I think there's an opportunity to make it simpler. Mentions Jordi. Yeah, I know it's point to Jody voice for Daya. Okay, thanks. Okay, good. So if any comments, please as well have a look in particular to the must on the controlled vocabularies, have a thought over it.
Okay, so this was the set of DCAT-AP3 alignment issues. There are more. There are plenty more. As I mentioned, we won't have time to go through all of them. However, we split them into the more major ones that we are discussing in the webinar, and then there is a set of minor ones. Here, majority of the minor ones comes from the alignment needs with DCAT-AP3. So basically changes in DCAT-AP3 propagating into GeoDCAT-AP. So we are fairly certain how to do that. We do not foresee any conflicts. However, still, please have a look at these issues and please at least vote on them or discuss them in GitHub so that we know that the community has at least read the issues and have some opinions on them. These issues we aim at having resolved before the next webinar. The next webinar is scheduled on the 23rd of April. So we would like to resolve these issues before that webinar. If there are no negative comments or votes, then the proposition in each of those issues will be accepted. So these are the minor issues coming from the alignment with DCAT-AP3. And finally, the last section of issues are additional issues which are not necessarily connected to alignment with DCAT-AP or the style guide. And the first of those issues is with how long textual information is currently represented for right statements, provenance statements, and licensed texts in GeoDCAT-AP, where the current situation is that there is a blank node of a certain type, a provenance statement, a right statement, or a licensed text, and then an RDFS label, which, however, can contain even quite a long text, as can be seen in the example, which does not really fit the RDFS label use case. And we have identified that this practice came from a Dublin Core usage guideline where this was suggested. However, this was deprecated already in, I think, 2008. And therefore, we propose here to change this practice from RDFS label to Dublin Core DCT description. For the right statement text, provenance statement text, and license text, there is another issue regarding providing license text this way, but in case that license text stays in the specification, then this resolution of this issue will apply to that as well. So the proposition here is to change RDFS label to Dublin Core description, which is more fit for even longer texts that we can see in the example. So here, either any comments or yes, please vote.
I have the feeling that the community is supporting the proposal.
Okay, thank you. So we'll accept this and change the mapping to Dublin Core description. Another issue we face here is the expectations of properties specified for supporting classes, like standard, where in the specification there is a list of recommended properties, for some classes even mandatory properties. But here the issue is that sometimes the recommended properties are not used even in the examples of GeoDCAT-AP itself. And the feeling is that the actual meaning of those listed properties is that they should be used whenever an IRI of that standard or a category scheme and such is not known. And that standard in this case needs to be described using the listed properties so that it is clearer which one is meant in case there is no identifier available for it, especially in a mapping from INSPIRE metadata to GeoDCAT-AP. However, this assumption is not explicitly said anywhere in the specification. So the proposition here is to explicitly say, using a note, that the properties listed for supporting classes are to be used mainly when an IRI of the instance is not known. Then they are used to describe that instance instead of identifying it. But the preferred way is to actually use an IRI whenever it is available. And in that case, it is not expected that that IRI will be further described using those recommended and other properties within the GeoDCAT-AP record. I see a comment from Mantas. What if the IRI is known, but the IRI does not provide any additional information like title, version information, and so on? Wouldn't it be useful to provide these values in addition to the IRI? The assumption I forgot to mention here is that the linked standards and those things that have IRIs, they are expected to follow a good practice, which means that we assume that they will be described sufficiently to be actually usable as links from the GeoDCAT-AP records. So that's an assumption that we make.
And the reason why we do this, the proposes change additionally, is that this imposes, for instance, on standard, in this case, it's a good example, quite some nice mappings, which are useful properties. But if you look from a unique register of standards, you might have another different mappings and structure to it. So in this case, it is kind of the suggested mapping when you're busy with GeoDCAT-AP to follow this if you have nothing else available.
Okay, so if there are no comments, I can see a comment in the chat that again suggests that maybe this could be even lifted again to a discussion about the style guide, because it is quite a generic one, whether to list properties that we would kind of expect that that resource that we normally link to using IRIs provides. But yes, as Bert mentioned, there is a problem that, for instance, the European code list, they do not have a title. Here, here we expect that whichever standard we use with GeoDCAT-AP would have the title because we recommend to use it. So it is kind of unclear what is being meant at the moment. And Jody says, would it be an option to maintain both methods? Well, the problem is that it is a bit unclear for the implementers what to expect when there is an IRI. Should we expect that that IRI, even though it is an IRI of an external concept, is actually described using those properties in GeoDCAT-AP? Should the implementers actually strive to describe even foreign concepts in the GeoDCAT-AP record or not. So the proposition here is to be clear on what is expected, that IRI is preferred, and if not possible, then the properties that are listed are to be used to describe that resource. Of course, yeah, so this is about the note saying the preference, and then no one actually prohibits anyone from describing external resources. That's another issue.
Yeah, so to conform to Geraldine, yes, this approach can be done, but it is then, let's say, an additional service. It's not the expected outcome, not mandatory that this has to happen for every known URI.
Can I just make a very brief comment? GeoNames, for instance, is referred to, and it's a very large one. It's an open question. We sometimes provide a label, even though it is well-established URIs. So I think this is an interesting discussion that could be brought up in the style guide. Like maybe there are 3 cases, well-knowns, but you provide the label anyway, and then URIs that you only refer to. I'm not convinced either way here. I'm just saying that there are situations where you may want to provide a label anyway.
Yeah, the thing is, I agree. And then we have a challenge in the specification, how we express that in the case you have the GeoNames, you always want that they have to provide still the label, even if it is provided by the service of GeoNames. So this kind of subtlety, how we express this in the specification as expectation. So this is we're looking for the right sentences to have the right expectations expressed. That's what we are looking for here.
Okay, I see no further comments or hands raised.
Okay, thanks for the feedback. So anyhow, feedback in 111, more on this.
Yes. Okay, so no voting needed here. Please provide your feedback on how do you think this could be tackled in the GitHub issue. There is another connected issue, or actually it's 2 issues that have the same underlying reason, and that is that in GeoDCAT-AP we have recommended and optional properties for supporting classes. However, the recommended properties do not seem to be followed even in GeoDCAT-AP examples. So we have a list of recommended properties for a standard here, but in the examples, not all of those are being followed. And here we have a couple of questions regarding this practice. What does it actually mean that property of supporting class is recommended? Does it mean that all standards mentioned by GeoDCAT-AP should be described using those recommended properties? Or does it mean that there is a registry of standards that provides descriptions of those standards used in GeoDCAT-AP using the recommended properties? Or should those recommended properties, and that's the connection to the previous issue, be used only when there is no dereferenceable IRI for that standard? So it is unclear what actually the meaning of recommended is here. And our proposition here would be not to differentiate between optional, recommended, and mandatory properties for supporting classes. And then this problem would not be there, together with the previous issue and the explanation of where to use the supporting classes properties and where maybe not. This would give a clearer guidance on what to do with those properties of supporting classes. So the proposition here again is not to differentiate between optional, recommended, and mandatory properties for supporting classes, because it is actually unclear how to treat those. So could we have a vote on the proposition?
I think there's more doubt here, Jakob. It's a bit of thinking more needed from the community. I have the feeling that it's.
Okay, so in this case, there is not much feedback to these issues. So again, we'll defer to consulting or discussing those in GitHub, and we'll resolve those based on the discussions or votes there. In addition to the issues discussed, there is one minor issue, the relation of various agent classes used throughout the specification, which has to do with the fact that there are 3 different classes used for representation of agent, and it is unclear what is their relation in terms of properties to be used. So again, this is one of the minor ones. So please vote on that or discuss that in GitHub. And this brings me to a final set of properties of issues, which are very minor or editorial, which we are fairly certain we know how to resolve. So the propositions again are in the respective issues in GitHub. And again, we ask you to vote and discuss those if you don't agree with the proposition that is described there. Otherwise, these issues will be resolved before the next webinar. And I see one comment in the chat.
Yeah, it's about from the mandatory properties in the proposal of the previous one. There's one case, just to highlight that there's one case where we have for supporting class a mandatory property. That's the reason why it's all in the lists. So, yeah, because if you say that this property is mandatory for the supporting class, does it mean that in all cases this should be there? In all usage cases of the supporting class. And that might have a large impact on the structure and on the provided data.
Okay, so this is it for the issues of today, and I give the floor back to Pavlina.
Just to come back to the list of next time, yeah, can we go back here? So if you go to the GitHub issues, if you click on the label from the webinar, then you get the list of the topics that we will be discussing on that moment in time. So there is already now in the chat, there has been a request for, let's say, what is next up in the next webinar thing. So the topics that we will raise during the webinar, not in the exact form in the slide deck as it is, but the topics that will be raised are being discussed in textual and already highlighted in the GitHub. So you can find what is the agenda for the next time over there. And it might be that the topic is listed, but very shortly, just like some of the issues were today, with very short and a quick confirmation of the meaning of the proposition. Whereas for others, we might reach to a topic that we say, okay, we have to discuss this further on and get more feedback from you. So please use our GitHub for your agenda.
Yes, to complement to this, And on this, because we see a lot of comments in the chat also with regards to how we organize the webinar. We hear you. And we would like to kindly ask you to make comments and follow GitHub, because for us GitHub is the source where we one of the most important sources that where we take the input and hear what you are suggesting, and then try to come up with a proposal. We would like to, in order to do this, and for before each webinar, we will send with invitation the list of topics, the list of issues, GitHub issues that we would like to discuss in the forthcoming webinar. Perhaps we can list it in more details, but this also requires from your side that we have a prompt answer to this. Sometimes we come up with the circumstances that we are receiving GitHub issues even during the webinar or the previous day. So it is very difficult for us to consolidate the different issues and come up with a firm proposal. So what we heard today, and it is super valuable from our side, we hear that some issues need to be further discussed due to the peculiarity that it has the geospatial domain. So we, in order to do this, we will highly appreciate for your comments. And to have a bigger view, and so that we can further discuss them into our forthcoming webinar, the 23rd of April. We also hear that some issues need to be escalated, will be further be escalated to the style guide. So we will take this under consideration for the webinars on the style guide. For those who are not familiarized with the style guide, we will provide you in the chat the link to the style guide, so that you can take a glance on this and to understand a bit of the rationale behind what we are suggesting, because some things we understand that we cannot violate and turn upside down what is already implemented during so far in the geospatial community, but we try from our side to find a connecting point and have to the level that can be reached, or at least progressively a common way of approaching things without disturbing from one moment to another the different things. So the planning is for the next webinar. It is for the 23rd of April. We are planning also a webinar in May, in order to boost with the progress, as well as to invite some member states to share their view on how they are implementing things, especially for the case of the tools that they are using. Next slide, please. So, as I said, the topic of this forthcoming webinar would be geospatial coverage and resolution, and as well as to mention reference system and spatial type. And in the third webinar, we will have we will focus on the tools, and then we will discuss. We will invite some member states to share their experience on the tools that they are using, such as the XSLT. So, as I said, please provide feedback. to GitHub. You can find this the links. As usual, after the webinar, we are publishing the meeting minutes, the recordings, the slides of the webinar. So feel free to share it and provide us feedback on the things that are pending issues. We want to publish a new editor draft, but we are not neglecting the connection between GeoDCAT-AP and the high value data set. So this mapping will be done in a separate document. So thank you very much for your attendance. Happy to hear from you through GitHub comments and to have you on our next webinar. Have a nice evening.